All right, let me note again Catherine's last press conference here at FERC before she moves on to bigger and better things. So we'll take note of that. And let me just pick up on some substance, noting the PJM report that came out this week that I mentioned during the reliability presentation. Was pretty, it took me aback that PJM is actually thinks they're going to have to use emergency measures to meet load. I don't think they've ever put a report out saying that they were actually planning to use emergency measures. And it's really about the same issue that they've been talking about. Their operational capacity is down 3.6 gigs, and their load's up 1.9 gigs. So it's the same trend that we see, and I've been talking about for years, really, which is the arithmetic doesn't add up when you're losing dispatchable generation and through early retirements, and it's not being replaced with equivalent capacity. You don't have to be a math PhD to see that the arithmetic just doesn't work, and we seem to be getting closer and closer and closer to the edge in PJM, and it looks like, and I hope it doesn't happen, but their report earlier this week was sort of giving a warning that it could be as soon as this summer. Now, we hope not. Obviously, we hope not, especially those of us who actually live in PJM. But I want to just note that report, which is consistent with NERC's overall report that you heard about across the rest of the country. They didn't mention PJM in it, but I think apparently PJM needs to go into the warning zone as well. Also want to express one more thing about PJM. I actually went out to attend their board meeting, which they had in Virginia this week. They met out at Leesburg. And when I got out there, I found out that they had, the members had voted not to reelect two of their board members, including Mark Takahashi, the chairman. Now, we don't control who gets elected to the board of PJM or any other. I think, James, you wrote about it. Or somebody at RTO Inside wrote about it. I thought it was James.
Oh, Devin, I think.
Devin, okay. But I just want to express concern. We don't determine who goes on what RTO board, but if PJM, as someone who's been in the PJM territory now for 21 years, first as state regulator and now as FERC regulator, I'm particularly concerned about. We had auction results last summer that obviously became very controversial, led to many filings here at FERC, not just from PJM, but from many other groups, including the governor of Pennsylvania. I mentioned at the last monthly meeting, we've had a lot of politicians in PJM, including governors of states like New Jersey, Maryland, criticizing particularly Manu-Istana, and I think a lot of that criticism, I said last month, I thought a lot of that criticism is misplaced. A lot of the problems in the PJM zone are particularly a result of state policies, and PJM is being blamed unfairly. But when I go out there and find out that there's sort of a groundswell or whatever that led to the removal of two board members, and again, it's under their operating agreement. We don't tell them how to elect board members or who to elect. But I've expressed my concerns about the governance in PJM before. We had a couple cases last year where I've written separate statements expressing my concerns about the governance in PJM. I think, for one thing, there's not nearly enough state involvement in the governance in PJM. But I just mentioned because we're looking at major problems with the capacity market. We're going to talk more about those at the tech conference in June. First day in particular will be largely about PJM. The capacity market has got major problems, and it's really a source of a lot of the discontent. But I'm just concerned when I see, from a governance standpoint, something like what happened this week, where people who are trying to do their best. I think Mark Takahashi, frankly, has done a good job, just like I think Manu-Istana, who, by the way, announced he's leaving. So we're losing the CEO. He's leaving. Now two board members, including the chairman, not reelected by membership vote. So it gives me concern about the governance of PJM, and at a time when they're facing coming up, the need to do some major changes. And we'll talk about a lot of those changes when we get to June, but I just want to mention that because it happened just this week, and I think RTO Insider is the only one that wrote about that. But I thought that was and I happened to be out there because I was invited to come speak, and so I heard about it when I was out there. But anyway, with that, let's go. You're not going to let Catherine go first? This is her last time. Okay. Well, she didn't raise her hand, so all right. George gets to go. He raised his hand.
All right. George Whitecamp with Platts. Thank you again for doing this. I just wanted to ask, as you know, your term expires at the end of next month. Mm-hmm. Have you had any contact with the White House on the possibility of serving a second term? Is that something you're interested in? Would you like to serve a second term? If you could just speak on that.
Yeah, I'm not commenting. That's what I've said all along, which is to say I'm not saying. And it's a great job here at FERC. I mean, it's a very important time at FERC. We're doing very important work. But beyond that, I really don't have any comment.
Would you intend to stay beyond the June 30th deadline? Because the statute, I believe, would allow you to stay to the end of the year.
Yeah, the statute, the DOE Organization Act allows any member to stay until the Senate adjourns sine die, which is usually after Christmas or around about that. And but I don't. So it's true the statute lets you do that, but I don't really have any announcement at this point. Yeah, Catherine.
Thank you, Chairman, for the questions, and thanks for the shout out. I appreciate it.
Okay.
I wanted to ask a bit about, some of the concerns that you've raised within PJM and other markets about retiring power plants.
Right.
Obviously, the president has put forward an executive order on trying to keep the coal fleet going. And I'm wondering if there's been a conversation or a thought about what role FERC might play in that down the road. If there is an effort to keep a plant on longer, that might play into a rate question that FERC would have to deal with. Has there been a discussion around that, around what role FERC would play, and is there any detail you can give on that?
Yeah, well, as I said, I think last month, I think AJ asked me, we did not consult with the DOE on the development of the executive order, which was appropriate because our role was pretty clear, and that is, if there's any designation of any generating unit, coal, gas, nuclear, any generating unit, if they're designated under Section 202 of the Federal Power Act, which that's DOE's authority to do, not FERC, we're the ones who then have to rule on the cost recovery. So we know what our role is. If a unit is designated under 202, or RMR, reliability must run, and we just had a case like that, which I'm not going to comment on because we're in the 30-day rehearing period, but I'm just speaking generically now, okay? So if an RTO designates a unit as an RMR, reliability must run, and we just had one, so you can go look it up. I'm sure you're all well aware of it. We're the ones who have to approve or disapprove the cost recovery. Same thing with 202. Section 202 designation. If there's a Section 202 designation, which is an emergency designation, we don't do the designation, just like we don't do the designation on RMR, but we have the fun task of looking at cost recovery and approving it or not approving cost recovery. So that's our role. We know that for sure. Yeah.
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, how do you think about balancing the potential cost implications of, needing to charge customers more to keep a power plant running with, the need for power? Like, how have you thought about that?
Well, I'm going to talk generically because, those cost recovery filings will come here. So obviously I don't want to prejudge and say it's too much or too little or not enough or too much. But here's the situation we're in the United States of America circa May 2025. And I've been like a broken record about this. And this we have not been building sufficient resources, and we've been retiring too many resources. Now, a large number of the units that have been retiring have been coal. That's a fact. Okay, that's not my opinion. That's a fact. I was in talking to PJM just, out at their event this week, talking to a lot of the PJM people. They are very concerned that they're losing exactly the coal units that they need to keep running, at least for the short term. That's why we have a warning from PJM this summer that they may have to use emergency measures to meet load. So we're losing these units, which same in MISO, by the way. You get the same report from MISO. We're losing these units that we have to keep load, and the problem seemed to be the problem of early retirements are largely centered in the RTOs. They're not in the IRP states. In the IRP states, a unit that's in service can continue to run, and the state regulator can approve cost recovery through cost of service. So it's not a problem by and large. If units are retiring prematurely in non-RTO IRP states, it's because the state regulators have let them retire, or have made the decision to build to replace what's retiring through the IRP process. This problem that we see about the premature retirements is predominantly in the RTO regions, and it's because the market structures, what I've called so-called market structures, because I don't think the capacity market's even a market. It's an administrative construct designed to pay generators what's called the missing money, which is their capital expenditure, which is what it takes to get units built. The whole premise of the capacity market was, instead of having high capital expenditure units financed through rate base, we'll finance them through this thing called the capacity market. I think after 20-some years in PJM, it's pretty obvious to me it is really failing to work, and so I think that's the heart of the problem. And you say, is it going to cost too much to pay a unit cost of service because it's designated as an RMR or it's designated as a Section 202? The answer is yeah. It probably would have been a heck of a lot cheaper to do it through a regular state-regulated cost of service process, but that's not where we are today. We're in a 20-year period of experimenting with the capacity market to be the source of generation capacity, and I think particularly in PJM, it has not been working. I hope that answered it. That's a long discourse, but we'll go with James.
James Downing, RTO Insider. It seems like PJM is going to be relying on demand response a lot more this summer, and I know, what are your thoughts on that? It seems like those resources have been there in a lot of years where they just haven't been used. They've been just collecting payments officially. Is that going to maintain reliability? Is that the answer here?
Well, you go back and look at Winter Storm Elliott, which was the Christmas storm. I think it was 23. And 22. She says 22. Okay, time flies when you're having fun, right? And but I remember very distinctly, PJM particularly, it was Christmas morning, 4 a.m. I was up watching their dashboard because I live in PJM and I'm worried about whether, not only as a regulator am I watching it, but I'm watching it as a residential customer. And PJM came under 2% reserve margin. They came that close to having load shedding and major outages. They came that close at peak. Their DR, the demand response, they reported afterward about, as I recall, the number was about 3/4 of what they were planning on did not show up. Because DR is a behavior. It's not a generating unit. It's behavior. And the behavior they were expecting, about 3/4 of it did not show up. And that's what pushed them down into the, to the deep red zone, almost to the edge. As a state regulator, we approve DR programs. DR programs at their best are what sometimes they've been called peak shaving programs. And there is a definite role for peak shaving programs. I mean, again, we call DR peak shaving. And there are absolutely times when it is critical at times of peak when you're running the fleet full out and you have nothing left in the arsenal except DR. So it's critically important, and yes, it's a valuable asset, and we approved DR programs as a Virginia regulator. But their emergency measures when you go in, you don't, you don't plan a resource mix to say, well, let's just plan on having an emergency and use emergency measures because of the reliability aspect to it. So yes, roll for DR. Again, think of DR as what it used to be called, which is peak shaving. But it's a discrete roll at times of extreme demand, and it's an emergency measure. You roll it out when your fleet's running flat out, and you just can't, and you're getting, and usually because you had unplanned outages, you had units that went out on you that you weren't planning on. But you don't plan a system to be in an emergency on a regular basis. An emergency should be an emergency. I mean, something that doesn't happen all the time. You don't plan the system to use it as an emergency. So what concerns me about where we are in PJM is now they're saying that under very possible circumstances this summer, they'll be using emergency measures to meet load. And I don't think American consumers, by and large, want to think that to keep the electric grid going, they're going to have to be told, don't use electricity. And again, that's not to say there isn't a role for DR. We approve DR programs as a state regulator, but they're an emergency measure. Again, the report from PJM after Elliott was about 3/4 of the DRs that they were counting on didn't show up. Yes, sir.
Hi, Carlos with E&E News.
Right.
I wanted to ask a reconciliation-related question. The Energy and Commerce text says that it would amend the Natural Gas Act by inserting carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and petroleum pipeline permitting. And so I wanted to ask, does FERC feel like you all should take on the permitting of interstate carbon dioxide pipelines? And just given what you said at recent meetings, do you all have the staffing capacity to do that? Thanks.
Well, any new duty that might be given to us, whether it's, you mentioned what, carbon dioxide pipe or hydrogen pipelines, carbon dioxide. I've been asked before, because I was asked also in front of the committee one time, House Energy Committee, I think, or whether we had authority over hydrogen, because hydrogen pipelines, because that's been a thing for a while. And my answer was, no, we don't currently have. Well, first of all, under hydrogen, we don't have authority. But if they give us authority, then obviously we would have to have additional resources. No, we do not have the expertise or the resources to take on a whole new area. We could go out and obtain the expertise. We'd have to go out and get it. But we're operating pretty lean. Our OEP, which is our Office of Energy Projects, if you've been reading my letters, has been doing a great job of just handling their own portfolio, which is gas pipelines. We do permitting of interstate gas pipelines. We don't do oil pipelines. We don't do hydrogen pipelines. So anytime you give us more, we'd have to obviously get the resources.
Can I have a follow-up on that, in that there's, pipeline systems that are out there that, are currently have, their permits. They've been permitted by the PUCs in individual states, except that one state is a holdup. I'm specifically thinking of the Summit Carbon Solutions, the system they have in the Midwest. And so do you think that this is a response to that because they're unable to get permitted by all the states in their planned route, that they would prefer to be permitted by one entity, which would be FERC?
Well, if you're asking me to get into the mind of the individual legislators who are voting for stuff, I can't, you have to go ask them. I know there's a point of view, it's been on this commission in years past, that it's better to have one national permitting agency for everything. And it usually comes from groups that want something done quicker, like transmission. There's a point of view that we ended up with the backstop siting authority for transmission. Well, transmission is 99.99%, permitted at the state level. People think that it would be better to have FERC be the the national transmission permitter. I don't think so. There are people who would like to see FERC have more authorities, for example, on permitting oil pipelines. We don't do oil pipelines. We do gas. That's what we do in the Natural Gas Act, and we do a great job at it. And we've had that authority since before World War II. I think it was a wartime measure, but the idea, well, we don't like the fact that states get in the way on permitting. I don't personally buy that because, obviously, you know me, I'm very biased towards the states. I was a state regulator for a long time. And by the way, even when it comes to gas pipelines, yes, we have permitting authority over, the way I put it to non-expert crowds is, like I'll speak to a Rotary Club and I'll say, look, what FERC does is we permit gas pipelines if they cross the state line. If a gas pipeline does not cross the state line, your state permits it. So we have interstate pipeline authority. We do not have intrastate. And in fact, when I was a state regulator, we approved intrastate pipelines. Usually they were running from an interstate line as a lateral to a combined cycle gas generating unit. And so we had to approve the pipeline, the lateral as well as the unit. But the question whether FERC should be or any federal agency should be permitting everything, no, I don't. That's not my personal view, but we have gas pipelines. We do a great job at it, and we'll keep doing a great job at it. Yeah, Maya.
Thank you. Maya Weber with Platts. I had another question about the House Energy and Commerce Reconciliation Bill. I'm sure you know there's a provision that for applicants that pay a fee of $10 million, they can have an expedited review, and the bill says FERC shall approve, though it can condition. I'm just wondering if you have any view on that change, whether you think it's sound, does it dilute FERC's ability to oversee or its leverage, and do you think that that has solid legal footing as it's currently construed?
I didn't even know it was there till you just said it.
Oh.
You may be surprised to learn that I don't read every word of a bill in process. Bismarck said 2 things you don't want to watch getting made are legislation and sausage. And I just tend to wait and see what comes out at the end. And I think from everything I've read, there's a long way to go. Yeah. AJ.
Thank you, Chairman. AJ Camacho with E&E News. I just want to follow up on if you've received any guidance from OMB, from OIRA about the implementation of the February executive order that subjects all significant regulatory actions to White House review. If you've got any specifics on what they're going to consider significant regulatory actions, how that's going to play out, and also if you've gotten any guidance on how they're defining the Section 7 about the President and Attorney General's interpretation of the law being binding. I ask because there's been some NRC reporting that essentially any draft rule is going to be submitted for a preliminary review from OIRA, where they'll decide on a case-by-case basis if they want to provide edits or comments.
Mm-hmm. Well, we haven't had this situation arise because we haven't done any NOPRs. We haven't done any proposed rules. My understanding is they want to at least know what you're doing before you do it, which I don't mind. I'm happy to tell them what we're doing. But again, we don't have any proposed rules, so it really hasn't arisen. I think that they want to review what you're planning to do. And again, we don't have any plan. We don't have any proposed rules that have gone over to. But that's my understanding of how it would work. Is they want to see what you're going to do, and you explain what you're going to do, and then they see if it conflicts. And as I said before, I'm happy to tell anybody in the administration what, on a consulting basis, on a general basis, what we plan to do, what we'd like to do. And I've had conversations. Look, there's never been a major rule passed by this commission that was 180 degrees in violation of what the presidential administration wanted to do. I think it's ludicrous to think that ever happened. So obviously there's been consultation back and forth. And I said before, we don't live in a parallel universe without, a presidential administration. Of course, you consult, but there hasn't been a NOPR. Okay, we haven't been. Now, when it comes to be a NOPR, I'll tell you.
If I may, one follow-up on that. Another component of the NRC reporting is that OIRA is asking for certificates of compliance for storage and transportation systems as something that's not even related to rulemaking, and that they're going to take a look at those already existing certificates and possibly even consider editing those. I'm curious if you've gotten any indication that they would consider anything adjudicatory from FERC for review.
No, that's news to me. But I'm going to repeat what I said, I guess, in February at this press conference. We're going to follow the law. Whatever the applicable law is, we're going to follow it. I'm going to follow it. Whether it's Administrative Process Act, whether it's DOE Organization Act, whether it's Natural Gas Act, Federal Power Act, we're going to follow the law. And ex parte communications on pending proceedings apply in certain circumstances. I mean, if somebody files a 205 here under Federal Power Act, if somebody files a 206 here, if somebody files a permit application under Section 3 or Section 7 of the Natural Gas Act, those are all contested proceedings where ex parte rules apply. And we are going to follow the ex parte rules. No question about that. So I didn't even heard about what you're talking about. Now, rulemakings are different. You can talk to anybody about rulemakings. And believe you me, we get lobbied all the time. I mean, in 1920, it's like busloads, okay? So there's nothing wrong with talking to just about anybody on rulemakings, and we do, and they want to. Every lobbyist in town comes about big rulemakings like 1920, believe me. Oh, Maya, you want another one?
Okay, it's, I guess, maybe a related question about applicable law. I don't know if you've had a chance to see the memo from OMB about the social cost of carbon and greenhouse gas quantification. That was May 6th. That is basically asking agencies to sort of minimize the quantification and not use the social cost of carbon. And one part of that caught my attention, that if there was a contrary circuit court ruling, that agencies should consult with DOJ about the non-acquiescence doctrine, which I believe would be, possibly not following such a finding. So
Non-what doctrine?
Non-acquiescence doctrine.
That's a new one to me.
Okay.
I thought I knew all the doctrines.
When I looked it up, it seemed to indicate that, there might be circumstances where you wouldn't necessarily follow a specific appeals court ruling. So I just wanted to bounce that off you.
Well, on social cost of carbon, I've always thought social cost of carbon was just absolutely, utterly bogus. It is junk science. It's always been just a junk science tool to try to stick a number on a pipeline of some purported validity that I never thought was valid at all. And as soon as I became chairman, I say we're not using social cost of carbon in determining in our NEPA reviews because I just think it's utterly bogus. So I don't know what you're referring to about all the other stuff. And I've never heard of this non-acquiescence doctrine. I mean, that's a new one to me. But I think social cost of carbon has always been just a bogus thing, and it's not scientifically valid. I think it's pseudoscience. So I don't think it has any role in NEPA reviews, frankly. Yeah.
Hi, Carlos with INI. I was wondering if you could elaborate on FERC's relationship with the National Energy Dominance Council. Maybe how often you're talking with them, who you're talking with there, and what you all are doing together. Thanks.
I've had a conversation with one of the members, not a member, I think it's a staff person, and let him know we had a nice conversation about what FERC does. This was like a couple months ago. And let him know what FERC does, and that's the extent of it, really. Yeah, George.
The April 9th executive order on sunsetting regulations mentioned that each of the listed agencies would be consulting with a team lead from the Department of Government Efficiency. I just kind of wanted to ask if you had any updates on if you have representatives from that department at FERC, if you are planning on having representatives, if you've had any contact with Doge. Would really appreciate any insights you have.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the one about putting a sunset on every regulation. And let me just reiterate what I said last month. I can think of a lot of not a lot. Well, maybe it depends what you consider a lot. I can think of regulations that FERC has issued that I would certainly like to put a 1-year sunset on. I mentioned one last time. It was the Order 679, which is the FERC order, which hands out all the FERC candy, which I've been vocal about, even as recent as yesterday. So yeah, I'd love to put a 1-year sunset on that, assuming I get 2 other votes. But to put a sunset, and there's some other regulations I would like to put a sunset on. But to put a sunset provision, which basically says that after 1 year it's null and void, that's obviously a big deal from a regulatory standpoint. That's a material change, and you have to comply with the Administrative Process Act. And I mentioned, okay, if we put a 1-year sunset on Order 679, all the interest groups who very much like the FERC candy and have been lobbying very hard to keep the FERC candy are simply going to run into the D.C. Circuit the next day, maybe the same day, and they're going to file against it, and they're going to win if we didn't follow the Administrative Process Act. And so it has to be done in a way that complies with the Administrative Process Act, and that's a very complicated statute. I think I said last time there was a lot of nooks and crannies. To expand on the real estate metaphor, I would say it's a mansion with many rooms, and the lawyers know all the rooms, and you can go into one of the rooms and get stuck and never get out. And so APA is a real challenge. But if you don't do it right, you've just wasted your time. So as far as guidance, I think we should try to fulfill what the APA requirements are, and one of which is public comment. I don't think you're going to get rid of a major regulation without some opportunity for public comment, and we would like to do that.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think with that we're done. Thank you so much.
Keith, you out? You got a question? Keith, he has his hand up.
Yes, I did. Thanks very much. This is kind of to follow up on AJ's question regarding the executive order from February. In that order, it also, in addition to consulting, requiring agencies to consult with OMB and OIRA, it gave federal agencies 60 days to provide sort of a list of regulations that the executive order suggests, could be either unconstitutional, unlawful, or maybe not consistent with administrative policy, and submit that to OMB and OIRA. I just wanted to see if FERC has compiled such a list and whether it has submitted that to OMB and OIRA.
Yeah, we did submit an answer. I don't want to reveal, interagency communications because I think they're privileged, but I don't think that there are any specific FERC regulations that you can just flatly say are illegal. If you look at Supreme Court opinions like FERC v. EPSA, go all the way back to New York v. FERC, which upheld Order 1000. It is hard to say that there's certainly FERC orders that I don't personally like. Whether they're on their face illegal is a stretch, because again, you look at Supreme Court cases. Go back to New York v. FERC. Again, look at FERC v. EPSA, another one, and it's hard to under those cases to just say, okay, a FERC regulation is illegal on its face because of it's hard to get there with those Supreme Court cases. I'm not even getting into the circuit court cases. Order 1000 was tested in the D.C. Circuit, in the South Carolina Utility Commission or whatever, and was upheld. Now, yeah, part of the upholding was under Chevron, which is gone, but it's hard to get around New York versus FERC and FERC v. EPSA, which is fairly recent. But so we reported back on our findings on that, but that's one EO. The EO on the sunsetting, I want to get back to that. I think it's actually a good, I mentioned this last month, I think it's a good idea for any agency to do what I call a regulatory house cleaning, where you look at everything in the cabinets and you look at everything that you've promulgated over the many years, and you do a strong look at what do we still need, what should get a 1-year sunset or some sort of sunset, so you can reconsider it. I think that's great. I think we should do that, and we're serious about that, and we're going to go through the process of looking at all our regulations and looking at which ones are no longer needed or no longer make sense. Again, I can think of some I didn't think made sense at the time. If you remember, just a couple of years ago, I dissented to Order 2222 pretty strongly. It's not unusual. And so I didn't think Order 2222 made any sense. I'd love to put a 1-year sunset on that. Again, I have to get 3 votes to do it. But I think the process of identifying rules and regulations that may have been around too long, and if you haven't done that, you may have rules and regulations that go back 20, 30, 40 years that just don't make sense. But so I want to do that. We're going to take a look at all the regulations. But anything that you want to put a 1-year sunset on, I'll make this point again. I mentioned Order 679, which is the FERC handout rule. You can't just put a 1-year sunset on that, in a 1-page piece of paper and think that it's not going to be challenged in court. There are many special interest groups. Look, what we do at FERC, there is a whole industry of lawyers in this town who follow everything we do. And they're really good lawyers, most of them. And they're going to go into court the second we do something like a 1-year sunset on a rule that they like. And this is it's not a dirty little secret, but I mean, a lot of industry groups like rules and regulations. The premise that all business hates regulations. No, there's a lot of interest groups, business groups that really like regulations. And there's a lot of interest groups that really like some of our regulations, like 679. And just as they're lobbying very hard to keep it, they're going to run into court the first second we would dare to put a 1-year sunset on it. So to do that, it has to be done in accordance with the Administrative Process Act. It has to be, or you're just going to get thrown out of court, and it's going to be a big waste of time. And you haven't accomplished anything.
Okay, I think we're done.
By the way, Keith, good article on the incentives.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye, Catherine.